Do your habits match your dreams? Well, oftentimes the answer is no, not just for our athletes, but for us. Nutrition and lifestyle, these are things that we actually haven't talked about in the podcast before, but without a doubt, they are a sign of a culture that is bought in, a culture where athletes off the field are committed to the behaviors that are critical to performance. They're committed to eating right, drinking right, sleeping well, and they're committed to their recovery. Now, just putting up some inspirational quotes on a wall, we know that that doesn't work. Reading, quotes to them before practice or saying them inspirational videos, even creating some off-the-field standards, that isn't enough. Like, athletes need to be supported to align their behaviors with their goals. In the next two episodes of the podcast, Daniel Davey, who is a renowned performance nutritionist, working with elite teams like the Dublin senior football team and the Leinster Rugby team, he's going to explore with us the intersection of team culture and lifestyle habits. And the very core of the conversation is going to center on why traditional methods like high-level presentations and workshops and meal plans, why they often fail, and how real change is driven by leadership commitment and individual relationships. In part one of our conversation, we're going to be talking about the primary driver of culture, why team workshops fail, relationship-based implementation, coaching behavior change, and coaching each individual. You're going to love it. Welcome back to the Coaching Culture Podcast. My name is JP Nerman, and I'm joined by my co-host, Nate Sanderson. The mission of this podcast is to help you grow as a leader and build a better team culture. To get the notes to this in every episode of the podcast, my weekly article, and other free culture building resources, just subscribe to the Team Culture Toolbox at tocculture.com. You can also subscribe to Betsy Butterick, our other co-host's weekly newsletter at betsybutterick.com, or just follow her on Substack at Betsy Butterick. Daniel, welcome to the podcast. I want to get us started today with a conversation that I think ties into culture. It's probably an area of culture that feels overwhelming and daunting to coaches, which is nutrition and lifestyle habits. And typically in many of the environments that I've worked in or kind of observed, coaches are afraid of this. So you've actually worked in some really high performance environments, some really successful environments here in Ireland, Dublin, senior football team, Leinster Rugby. And I'm curious, in your experience, what is the most single powerful strategy to shifting team culture around lifestyle and nutrition?
It's the coach really caring about it is the bottom line. That's the biggest driver of culture. And then if you can get your leaders, those athletes at the very top end of their game, to say this stuff is important, it just has this widespread ripple effect across the organization, and everything is tighter and everybody thinks it's important. And it's not, it's of course it is important, like every aspect is, from your strength and conditioning and your technical and your psychological skills training, and all of these components need their time. They need their energy, and they need their space in the conversation. But it has consistently been about, do the leaders care about it? What the opinion and position is, because that will allow then somebody like me to have the say that is meaningful or not. It's that simple.
Yeah, when you think about your work and in different environments, you've probably been more selective in the last few years that you were being brought in and there was alignment. I'm imagining is how you end up selecting the environments. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong in that. And so when you've come in there and the coach is committed, the manager is committed to, hey, this is important, then what becomes most challenging after there's a level of commitment? Because we could have listeners here that are like, oh, I'm all in, right? I want to make this important. So now what's the most challenging aspect for them?
Yeah, when you think about it mattering, then it's about how it's implemented, because people have a lot of personal bias towards what this space looks like or what it should be like. And very often athletes are coming from very different cultural backgrounds, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different levels of education. And I mean, it's only as recent as this week, a very high profile organization, it's a sports club, asked me about coming in and speaking with the whole environment. And there's still a bit of a sense that this can be done through presentation. This can be done as part of, something that's quite high level, but get significant impact. Whereas the reality of a lot of the work that I do is it's about timing. It's about building the relationship and the trust with the athlete and the person and understanding them on a very individual level. And that's why I would always be asked, not just from time to time, I would always be asked, what are you doing in those environments every week? What, like, you couldn't be still creating meal plans like 8 years later. And that's the point. It's no different to how the skill of picking up a ball or a tackle or the execution of a game plan that evolves. And athletes and people need time and they need space to recognize its value itself, but also to reflect on their behaviors. And I think just before we came on, we were talking about that aspect of culture and environment. And like, for me, it really is about people recognizing these things for themselves. So it'd be very easy for me to come in as Daniel, the performance nutritionist, says, or now we have these standards that we have to adhere to. Whereas the power is in the recognition of the value of this space and how it impacts individual and collective performance.
I really deeply resonate with your experience there. I think when I started my work here with TOC back in 2017, that's where I started. I was like, oh, I'm going to go give a talk on culture and leadership. And you realize that has next to no impact. In fact, it sometimes, in my opinion, would be detrimental because you're just giving a bunch of information but no support, and then it makes people feel disheartened. You're nodding your head, so you kind of somewhat agree, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know, does Nate want to come in there? But that is exactly it. It very often we have a massive challenge on our hands. Even I am a performance nutritionist and practitioner. I'm a business owner, and I'm going to be really honest here and say the easiest thing to do from a commercial perspective is to go into an organization and deliver a number of workshops. And it can be challenging to get that buy-in to that bigger part. But that's where the real impact comes, because it's a continuation of the conversation. So you go in, you open up this as an area of potential benefit, a competitive edge, people better prepared and recovering to far greater levels, which means the adaptation to the training and the whole feeling of that this is a high performing environment. Like, we are starting this conversation and then you disappear. Who has the conversations then? So that's exactly the point. It's like, we said we were going to make these difference. We said we were going to invest in it, but really it's the same shit. Like, you're just ticking a box like you always said you were. It's the same stuff, and people get pissed off and disheartened with that.
Daniel, I wonder if you could unpack that a little bit more, because in a sense, I think, we talked a little bit before we get on here about nutrition is maybe one example of many different factors that you could talk about when it comes to cultural change. And I do think there is this tendency in organizations to, bring in the expert that says, eat this, go to sleep at this time, or do this thing. And then you're just on your own with that information, but you're not really empowered. Then certainly the players aren't equipped to be able to put together their own plan or their own approach that's going to fit whatever their constraints are in their own life, right? So I would imagine kind of what you're describing is really a different approach to coaching altogether that I think, could benefit our coaches that are thinking, okay, I can see some places in my organization or with my team that I'd like to bring some deeper systemic change here rather than just presenting information. But how do I do that? How do you approach that kind of growth?
Well, first of all, it's about looking at the environment, and I'm just going to go through it maybe not as systematically as I should, but more as it comes into my head. And it is absolutely incredible what can be done if you think, right, this is important. We want somebody to represent the space. And like I often think about it from my perspective. I understand best practice, but you can have somebody in there like, and this is common, where you've got interns, and you've got people who are interested in strength and conditioning, and you've got a chef, for example, within the environment, who takes an interest in this area. So you don't need these huge budgets. It's more about a needs analysis, and going and looking at it and saying, okay, well, this is what we can do. This is what we can facilitate. So if you want to look at it from the perspective of identifying the leaders or the people who can hold some elements of these conversations within the environment, that's a positive. That genuinely is a positive. Now, there's only so far that you can take those conversations. There's only so far that those people can bring the detail in planning and in menus, or in, I mean, everybody wants to talk about supplements, but holding that space or holding that conversation. But the ideal scenario, like the absolute ideal scenario, is that somebody is on the ground that is capable of continuing to evolve the conversation, build those relationships, and have conversations with people who, like, you need to care. And I'm going to tell two very, very quick stories as a kind of as an example of this. One of them was, I was only in my job relatively early in Leinster Rugby, and it was just after Christmas of maybe the first season, and I'd been to every single home game. I wasn't traveling to all the away games, but I was at all of the home games, and I loved it. I really cared about seeing the players on the field perform. And back then, there was a lot of socializing. JP would probably resonate with this from being here, but that was a big aspect. And you'd have a couple of pints, like, you'd after games. So one of the young players who I got on with and clicked with quite well came up and put his arm around me, had a couple of drinks on him, and he was like, "I can't believe you're coming to all the games. Like, you're here all the, like, what is that? You know, is that in your contract?" And I was like, "No, of course I would. Of course I want to see you play. That's why I got into this. I want to see the team perform." And previously, maybe there was this idea that the performance nutritionist was this person who sat in their office or had one-to-one meetings or phone calls, or they just worked with the chef. So now you're repositioned as someone who's actually really invested in the sport. And that was the feedback I got. Not, "I'm absolutely loving the chicken with the pasta or that sauce." Now that comes too, but it really was the first time, because for me, and this is like a young, relatively inexperienced performance nutritionist, I was walking the line between not appearing as a fan, idolizing these athletes and what they were achieving, but still showing that I was there, that I was very present and very interested. So that was one thing. And then the other thing that happened in and around the same time, and this was with quite an experienced female athlete. And I remember her talking to me about what she was eating, and it was one of the most incredible meal plans I had ever heard. She was eating quinoa salad with homegrown herbs, and making her own lemon zest and honey flavored dressings. I mean, way beyond any effort that I would go to. At the end of the conversation, her name was Breda. I said, "Breda," I said, I actually feel like I can't charge you. You're operating at such a high level, and there's such depth and detail." And she paused and she smiled and she said, "Daniel, who else do you think cares about my lemon zest and honey flavored dressing?" So there's so many elements to this. And I know that's an incredibly long-winded answer, but you asked about that question about somebody within the organization. Is there somebody in your organization who cares about those things? Because those are behaviors. They're high performing behaviors. We don't need to draw in the science around gut health or antioxidant intake or management of inflammation. We just need somebody who cares about these things.
All right, we will be right back to our conversation with Daniel in just a moment. But first, I'm going to take a quick second to talk to you about the environment that you're building as a leader. So we talk a lot about on the podcast, the human element, like this idea that to truly impact performance, we have to coach the person, not just the problem. Now, if that resonates with you, I want to invite you to the TOC coach community. This is a space designed specifically for coaches who are tired of the box ticking approach and are ready to create deep systemic change in their teams. The best part, TOC Coach is completely free to join. You'll find a supportive network of coaches who are navigating similar challenges that you are facing. Now, for those of you that are really dedicated, the ones who have a truly transformational mindset and want to go deeper, I'd love for you to consider upgrading to premium. As a premium member, you'll get complete access to all 12 of our specialized courses to help you master every pillar of performance, coaching, culture, and leadership. It will also give you entry to all our live trainings where we unpack these concepts in real time. You'll also get personalized consulting for your specific team so we can help you apply these strategies directly to your context, to your unique environment, because everyone's context is different. Now, whether you're in the free community or premium member, our goal is going to be help you feel capable and confident and convicted in the incredible work that you're doing. So head on over to tocculture.com to join TOC Coach today. Now let's get back to Daniel and our discussion around the culture shift it takes to affect real change in your team's outlook on nutrition.
I wonder, as you look at your role, and certainly, you're consulting with individual athletes and with organizations and with teams. Do you see yourself differently now than you did when you started? Because it sounds like your approach has evolved, as you've gained more experience. Has the way that you see yourself as this person that's being brought in as a supportive staff changed as well?
I mean, I don't even really know where to begin with that. That's the truth, because so much has changed. And I think that's a big part of my job now. I feel I have changed so much from this time last year. Never mind when I started my career in the end of 2012. Maybe to adopt your phrase for a moment, to unpack all of the detail or even some of the emotion associated with it. A young man grew up very interested in food. Mostly it's women who are interested in food and who are interested in nutrition. You have to occupy a space in a male-dominated sport where you're challenged to bring in new behaviors and standards and to evolve these habits and these strategies, which are known to be beneficial, but there is resistance. So when you go through 10 years of working in elite sport, constantly being challenged to evolve your practice every single year in order to stay not just relevant, but impactful, you change as a person. You really develop a resilience, and you develop a confidence. And it's the age-old thing as well, where you learn an awful lot more about what you don't know and how much more complex all of these things are. But what you do know is this space is important, and this conversation is really critical to performance. It is a pillar for performance that if it's not invested in, your athletes and your people are not going to be at their best.
There's a fascinating side conversation I'm tempted to go down, which is just, me and Nate are in American sports, and it is so ignored in environments where there's no shortage of money. I look at the setup in Ireland where the money is way more scarce. And there's a real commitment that's grown in this country around nutrition.
Can I just lean into that for a minute?
Yeah, let's
Because
go. Let's go for it.
well, like I'm not going to occupy too much of it, but I have been absolutely baffled because I was incredibly excited by the opportunity. And I went in exactly like this, presented exactly like this. And people talked about believing in its value, and there was no follow-up, no follow-through. I just couldn't believe the facilities, how budgets were being used, and how there's no one on the ground and the need. I mean, athletes were stopping me on the campus to have conversations about it. And I was thinking I'd be back, nothing. So I'm baffled by it.
Yeah. It's something we might explore a little bit more in a second. But I'm really wanting to pull back. There was something you said a little while ago, which is in your role, it's almost like it's not about the presentations, it's not the workshops, it's the conversations. Like I imagine myself, all right, let's say I have an unlimited budget. I'm the, general manager of a large franchise. Head coach. I'd be bringing everybody in from strength and conditioning to mental performance coach. I'd have maybe a philosopher. I'd hire Ryan Holiday to be there with my athletes every day. Like I'd bring in everybody I thought was really wise, and yet it's not what they share. It's not what the Ryan Holiday might share in some presentation. It would be the conversation. So regardless of role, regardless of we're talking about nutrition, strength and conditioning, philosophy, the mental performance side, the mental side of the game, like what do those conversations need to be looking like?
They're incredibly simple, and they're just focused on this area where you need to bring. So if I think about our values and philosophy as a team, they're based around science. So science first, science informed conversations, and then they have to be practical, accessible, and it has to be enjoyable. So if those components are not there as part of that conversation, it's very difficult to build momentum. So when we're talking about the simplest things, I have really moved into this kind of performance psychology type of conversation where you're asking people, how do they recognize how they feel and what helps them to feel good. And the most common thing when it comes to this space within nutrition is energy. So energy is physical, mental, and emotional. And how can we recognize the behaviors and strategies that maximize your energy for training, that maximize your recovery, that maximize your availability of energy to perform? So the conversation is about those things that help people to do that. So if somebody is preparing for training, asking them what they eat and how they plan and how they manage their time and how they systemize their actions and behaviors for that training around nutrition. Now, everybody, not just some people, everybody thinks at an elite level that they've got it down. They think that elite athletes who are performing have this down. I've met national record holders who don't have nutrition plans, who don't do their shopping, who don't cook, who rely on pre-prepared meals. So going back to it, this is where the conversation has to be. It's like one of the things in that particular case that I talked about was, can we have milk in the fridge at all times and bananas on the counter? Like that's, and can we have that as a consistent? Because if currently there's no milk in the fridge consistently and we don't have any fruit on the counter, well, doing those two things is a win. So going back to that whole point about the conversation and how important that conversation is, you come back to that athlete in a month's time. What have they done? They have identified these two things as being important. We have said and agreed that milk provides electrolytes and protein and carbohydrate and is good for recovery. Is it in the fridge? So if, again, going back to those very simple inputs, If that conversation is not there, the likelihood of consistency drops. To what percentage? Depends on the athlete, but you're certainly dropping it. The chances of that happening consistently by about 50%.
Yeah, and what I think are maybe the ingredients for these conversations that I'm hearing you say is, first off, there has to be a level of care. Like, you go back to the story of, like, you just genuinely want to be around the team. I think about some of the teams that I've been involved here on the intercounty level in Ireland. Yeah, same contract was do X, Y, Z, but you're like, I want to be there because there's a level of care. But that care comes from like a curiosity and learning about the person. Whereas if you're just going in there and rolling out, nutrition plans and just dictating and telling people, and you're then really, how can care, that relationship grow?
It can't. And I this isn't necessarily an opportunity to, or that I think that this is going to dramatically change things, but we had a mentorship very recently that we published. We had 450 applications. There are a lot of young, ambitious performance nutritionists out there. That was very strong. And unfortunately, I don't say this in any sort of positive light, but we are not, the investment by organizations, and I know maybe in the States it might be it probably isn't. There probably is still a lot of young performance nutritionists out there. What I'm ultimately saying is, give them a chance. Give that whole pillar and that faculty a chance to make an impact.
Daniel, I wonder if I could follow up a little bit on milk and bananas, because when we think about organizational change or an athlete making this huge commitment to sleep and nutrition and, an overall lifestyle change that can be a competitive advantage, I think oftentimes we have this idyllic vision of what that's supposed to look like, and it's more than milk in the fridge and bananas on the counter. I'm thinking about number of workouts, and I go to sleep and prepare, and there's all these other things. And you're just talking about, let's take the first step forward. Can you unpack a little bit more of that approach? Because it seems a lot more accessible than this pie in the sky vision that seems a long way away from where I might be right now.
When we think about the factors variable, or if we think about it as the key determining factors around nutrition, so we're probably looking at 50 years of research. So there's very clear factors that have the biggest impact. So the very bottom of the pyramid is getting enough energy. And no matter how many times this is talked about, elite athletes, very often underestimate. Like, that's the number one thing. They underestimate the amount of energy they need, or it's not correctly proportioned to the demands of their week. And that goes back to the whole systemization. So traffic lighting your week is a very simple place to start. So we talk about red days, orange days, green days. The red days, let's start with those. When are you on the greatest physical, mental, and time demands? Because those are the days we need to be prepared for. That's when we need milk in the fridge and bananas. That's when we need our oats, our cereals, or potentially maybe on a Sunday evening, we've made our homemade snacks. We need the kit bag ready, not just the shorts and the foam roller and the towel and the moisturizer. The things that we've placed this very high level of value on. We need to look at the week and make sure that on those days we're getting enough calories. Then we need to look at the macronutrient breakdown. We need to ensure that there's enough carbohydrate, protein, and healthy fat. So that's the macronutrient breakdown. We can go into more detail if we need, but that's kind of going into and then we need quality food at the right time. So there's a timeline around it. And at the very peak, there's the 1 or 2% around supplements, whereas everybody wants to start with that. But that's they're the determining factors for a successful diet. Now, there's without complicating this, and I really don't want to complicate it. I really don't. And I said this, and I actually did this in a workshop last week with a group of 100 people. I said, in my consultations, if you give me between 3 and 5 minutes, I can, with the person or the athlete, identify the key actions that are needed for the next phase. That is sufficient time, okay, in a 1 hour presentation, a 1 hour session. The other 55 minutes is about understanding the person, understanding their self-talk, understanding their relationship with food, and all of the things that they are putting in the way of that 5 minutes. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So nutrition, performance nutrition, when you have this conversation repeatedly, I didn't ever think it was that simple. It isn't. But what about all the other things, from the influence of parents growing up, the economic, the socioeconomic components, the relationship with friends, and also body image, even with men, comes into it quite significantly.
All right, that's it for today's episode, part 1 of our conversation with Daniel Davey. Next week, we'll be unpacking the 55-5 rule, facilitating versus dictating, the power of identity, amateur versus professional athletes, the hurdles there, and then how we can coach confidence, how we build confidence within our players. It's going to be a great conversation around really behavior change within athletes. How beliefs are so often driving those behaviors. So you're not going to want to miss part 2. So be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And while you're subscribing, please leave us a review and share today's episode with some others out there that can find value in it. And don't forget to subscribe to the weekly Team Culture Toolbox so you can get the notes to this and every episode. Just do that over at tocculture.com.